especially in these times. Allah is with people who have patience, so I know Allah will shower His rahmah and His mercy. He has promised that, and it gives you a different sort of mindset. But when we read the Quran, my brothers and sisters, it is interesting. I know, and I keep on telling myself and telling people that it is very deep to understand. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We belong to Allah, and to Allah is what we do. A lot of times we say this just from our lip, but we really don't understand the haqiqat and the reality of that. It is important for us not to only understand Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un when someone passes away, but every day we should try to get that into our life, inculcated into our life, that we belong to Allah, we belong to Allah, our wives belong to Allah, our husbands belong to Allah, for the sisters, our children belong to Allah. Children are only entrusted to us as a responsibility as parents. They don't belong to us. Parents don't belong to us. We don't belong to parents. Wives don't belong to husbands. Husbands don't belong to wives. These are just language that we have to say from the language point of view. But the reality of it is we belong to Allah. And if we would understand that, we would live a different lifestyle. A lot of times we become very possessive. And we think that everything belongs to us. And then we want to own everything. And that's why it's hard. And that's why it's hard when we think of death and leaving this world. It gets a little complicated, because the soul leaving us is one thing. But our minds trying to think, how am I going to leave my wife and go? How am I going to leave my businesses and go? It's hard for us to think about it. Think about it. You got your businesses, and sometimes you got to go away somewhere, and we worry about how it's going to happen. What about the permanent going away? And Allah just takes our life. Now Allah takes some people's life like that. You go to sleep, you just don't get up, because sleep is the sister of death. Allah tells us all the time, be prepared. There's no specific time when He will take our soul. Angels have been written to take our souls. It's been written the angels will take our soul on a fixed time. They do not delay. It's punctual. We grieve and we cry and we worry that it's a loss. I know it's hard to say this, but it's not a loss. It's interesting. How could you lose what never belonged to you? समझ गया? How could you lose what never belonged to you? So if our parents never belonged to us, how could we lose them? The only reason why we think we have lost them is that's how we think in this world. The parents belong to us and we belong to parents. They don't belong to us. And parents say the child passed, I lost my child. We don't lose our children. The children belong to Allah. Allah sent them to us and Allah took them when He wanted to take them. But the whole mindset in this dunya is such that that's why you hear we regret to announce the death of someone. We have lost this person. These are little English terminologies in language, but in haqiqat, iman, we don't believe those things. We cry when we lose someone. We miss the person we love, and we cry. The Prophet cried for his wives when they passed away. Hazrat Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha for his children when they passed away. So nobody's saying no. Unfortunately, we have an extreme nowadays. Some people don't even believe you should cry when someone passes away. I hear that also. And I'm like, where did they get that from? Some people say, don't cry. Oh, if you cry, you're causing punishment. They misinterpret the hadith. The hadith says, don't scream and wail and get on like if the world has come to an end, because it's all about your iman. That's what the hadith says. It didn't say don't cry. Our Prophet doesn't cry when his sons passed away. Cry for his wife when she passed away. So that's not the point. But some people, and I hear this, and this is where people misinterpret hadith when they hear these wrong things. I don't know where it comes from. And they're like, don't cry, you're causing punishment. We don't have stone-hearted people. It is against the sunnah. We gotta understand the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, recently I think I did a class or a lecture in it. What happened in the days of ignorance in Jahiliyyah, people used to be paid to cry when someone passed away. They would mourn, and in some cultures they would wail and shout and create a big scene. The Prophet ﷺ, that's what he prohibited. He prohibited that. And it's well known, women used to go to the cemetery, and they would sit by the grave and shout and cry and pull their hair and wail and whine. And the Prophet ﷺ, that's when he had forbidden women from going to the cemetery. He had forbidden women from going to the cemetery, because that's not Islamic. So that's the extreme. Then later on, he revoked that. Oh yeah, later on he revoked that. And he made it back open for women and men to go to the cemetery. From a Sharia point, we don't encourage women to follow the janazah and go in the cemetery with all the men and the guy mahram and the whole 9 yards. That's what is not recommended. But women are allowed in Islam to go to the cemetery. And the Prophet says, and the Sahabas explain, so when they go, they will think about death. They will remember, and they will ponder, and it will soften their hearts. So the only reason why women don't go now when there is a janazah is the mixture of men and women and the ghayr mahram. Not that women are not allowed to go to the cemetery. Even Janatul Baqiyah in Medina, women go. There are times that you guys have been to Hajj. All of you, as Amir Sahib, when you go, there's a time the gate is open for the women to go in the cemetery. In the grave, where the wives of the Prophet are buried, next to Masjid al-Nabawi. Yeah, there's a time in the morning after Fajr, I think the women are allowed to go. Then you come here in America and you as a woman should not even go, you shouldn't cry. No. We get a little extreme in misunderstanding hadith. Yeah, so we misunderstand. But anyhow, so back to the other point. I'm doing a class here, so this one. But it's good for us to understand, because nowadays we hear a lot of all these new teachings and all these new things, and we misunderstand the hadith. But yes, that was the reason why the Prophet ﷺ says, think of death. When we think of death, we will laugh less and weep more. Where the hadith came from? We will laugh. So what does it mean you don't cry? Just to think about death, he says that you will weep. So we are allowed to weep and cry and shed tears when our dear ones pass away. Yeah, we are allowed. But not how other people do it in this mourning and this grieving, that, oh, why is my mother passed away? My father, why he passed away? My wife, my children, why they passed away? You don't question why. Already as Muslims, the Quran tells us that Allah created life and He created death. We were told that in advance. You're a believer? Allah, in addition to telling us, created the mountains. Why is it we believe Allah created the mountains and the fishes and the stars and the moon, and when it comes to death we are all like, we question why? You see what I'm saying? No, we are allowed to miss, we are allowed to cry, but we cannot question why. Or not at all. That the passing away of someone is supposed to build our iman. I know it's hard. It's hard. I till today I can't talk about my mother. I get very emotional since she passed away. I try not to talk about it. Let me just don't talk about it, because I just can't. I break down. See, so I understand that, and we all understand that, but it's only the Quran. And when I read the Quran, and Allah strengthens your iman, and then you hear what Allah, we belong to Allah, Allah takes back what belongs to him. That's what strengthens your iman. And we know we're not in control. And we see it happen. We see it happening a lot of times. Why do you think a lot of people, When they lose their children, they grieve and they grieve and they grieve, because we have not yet understood that the children never belong to us. That's a hard thing. It's hard to say that, but because we have never understood that. I have spoken to many people and they said it's easier to lose your parents than lose your children. And I'm like, what? You could make more children. You can't make more parents. Technically, you should be missing your parents more than you miss your children. Have you ever think about that? You listen to people who lose children. For the rest of their life, they say they grieve that they miss their children. Their parents, they take it for granted that they were supposed to go, because they don't think that they possess their parents, but they think they possess their children. They don't think that the parents belong to them. Yeah? But because our mindset says children belong to us, I've lost my children, so I grieve. And no. Equally, actually, our parents are more important to us than our children, brothers and sisters. What's the protocol of Islam? Allah, His Rasul, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and our parents. That's the order of protocol. So how could you miss children more than parents if they pass away? Doesn't make sense in the Islamic world. In this dunya, that's how people think, because we're brought up to believe the children belong to us. And that's why we don't think that this is an amanat from Allah. Children are an amanat from Allah. They were entrusted unto us. And that's why Allah will ask us about children. Did you bring them up in the right way? Did you teach them manners? Did you teach them Quran and Sunnah? Allah will say, I give you those children. You were blessed and gifted with these children. Did you do what I said to do for your children? Did you do that? I gave you children. Did you bring them up to please Allah? They belong to Allah. They don't belong to you. And then we in this dunya say, well, they are my children. I'll make them what I want. Astaghfirullah. You can't do that. But it's only when someone passes away we need to recollect these things. You know, when the child dies, and the child gets in an accident, then we think, oh, and then our brains start clicking. But I always hear this and I listen. How is it? It's because it's natural that parents will get old and they will pass away, and children are supposed to belong to us and we grieve. And no, it's just, actually we should miss parents more than we miss children. We have been longer with our parents than our children. And Allah gave them a whole, that's why you have so many volumes. But nobody says no. The Prophet cried for his sons when they passed away, so don't miss my point. Don't miss my point. But we need to understand the Iman in Islam. And I'm only saying this now because we have this brother Nafis passed away. And I know it's a lot of hurt, it's a lot of tears, and we will miss him. And you will never ever get that over your life. Never ever. And that's why the dua of a son is so powerful for a father, because that will be so sincere and so direct. But because we have gathered here, I just thought I'd remind myself on that, on life and death as we sit here. In a few minutes time, we pray. Isha is normally 8:40, so I'm just trying to make up some time. Isha is 8:40. So, as Muslims, now that somebody has passed away, a brother, it's good for us to think. No, this does not make much, but that's why if we understand that our children belong to Allah, then we will want to bring them up to please Allah. Isn't that sad to know that on the day of judgment, parents going into Jannah and you see your children going into Jahannam because we brought them up bad? Huh? Our parents brought us up fi sabilillah, so we learn to pray and we learn to give charity and we learn to I like what you just said, that you want to continue what your father used to do, mashallah. So we learn to do these things. So a lot of us are reaping from our parents, guiding us to good manners and to Islam. But how many of us are guiding our children to good manners in Islam? And the day of judgment, then we were like, oh, I made my child do that. I made him miss Jummah Salah. I made him not pray Salah. I never encouraged him to read Quran. I used to read Quran as the father, but I never encouraged him to read Quran. I never encouraged him to be charitable and kind. And then on the day of judgment, you sit there and you're like, astaghfirullah, but it's going to be too late. And then we'll be questioned. Allah will say, you did not take care of my amanah that I gave you. It's just a property. It's just like something you have. If you don't take care of it, you'll be questioned for it. Prophet ﷺ says, children are your wealth. Didn't the Prophet ﷺ say that? Don't we hear that all the time? We hear children is your wealth. And don't you know on the day of judgment, one of the questions will be asked is, what have you done with your wealth? Do we think that, Carissa? Children are your wealth. On the day of judgment, we'll be asked, what have we done with our wealth? How did you bring up these children? Only to boast to the world, this is my child, I made him a this, I made him a that, I gave him all the materialistic things in the world. But unfortunately, I didn't show him the path to Jannah. Will be questioned. So please, when someone passes away, it's when these thoughts come to our mind. When we're in a jolly, happy world, really forget about it. So I just thought I'd remind myself and you. This is a very close brother to the community, very close family member, and it's a good opportunity for us to reflect. And we're very fortunate that we are alive, and we must use the passing away of someone, min ayatina, as Allah says, from amongst His signs. Allah has used the passing away of someone as a lesson for the living to better their lives. And if we cannot learn from when someone passed away, then when else will we learn? If the passing away of someone cannot make our hearts think Allah Sirat al-Mustaqim on the right way, when are we going to think? Already when you go out in the haram territories, and we hear in haram and we see in haram, our brains jump in a different direction. It's like music. As soon as you hear music, your feet start to beat. It reflects automatically. Psychologically, your body starts to beat, your brain goes off track. So similarly, when we are surrounded with only materialistic things and we are only seeing all the dunya things in the world, our mind and our body thinks dunya very much. But when you go to the grave and you see the cemetery and you see someone being put, and you think about someone being covered, just days ago you were sleeping in a house with glass windows, AC, air conditioning, the whole 9 yards. And then you gotta look and think that your mom, your dad, your loved one is down there in a piece of cotton, just under the ground, left all alone down in Okeechobee. And that was the person you were sleeping with, slept with you, lived with you. That's hard. That's hard. That's hard. But that's the test that Allah has given us. And that's why we are supposed to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Strengthen our iman that belongs to Allah. And that's why in Islam, the soul leaves the body. It's just the body there. The soul leaves the body. The body is there, but the soul continues on. And if we would start concentrating a lot about the soul and this body, I think we live a better life. Don't wait to die, it's too late. When you get into the grave, it's too late to think that. There's no thinking anymore. That's the end of it. When we get into the grave, there is no thinking anymore. When the soul leaves us, there's no thinking. Now that we are alive, let us use the passing away of people. Listen, that's not my words. That's what the Prophet says. Why do you think the Prophet encouraged Muslims to go to the cemetery? Why do you think the Prophet encouraged Muslims to think about death? Why do you think the Prophet encourage us? The Sahabas, when they used to go to the cemetery, they would cry, tears. Very well known, Hazrat Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. His beard was soaking wet. He go to the grave and he think of the reality of life and death. Allah. How many of us think like that? They were Sahabas, they were close to Allah. Some of them, the Prophet mentioned to them, they were promised Jannah. The kind of people they were. But yet when they went to the grave, they would cry. And tears would flow and their beard would be wet. As Uthman radiallahu ta'ala, he cried so much that one of this companion who was with him, he asked him, why are you crying so much? He said, because the Prophet said this is the first stop on the journey to the hereafter. This is the first station. Yeah, this is the first in transit. And if this is okay, the journey will be okay. This is okay, the jinn will be okay, the Pulsarat will be okay, the Qiyamah will be okay, the Day of Judgment will be okay. So let us, when someone passes away, and that's why, when we get together like this, it's not about we could do anything, no. It's just a reminder for us to make dua, and it's not all about we making dua for Brother Nafis that passed away, or for people who passed away. That's one thing. But the other thing is for us to be reminded to be a better people. We've got to use that example, and tomorrow we will be in the grave. So what can we do good now? What can we do good now until the angel comes to take our souls? That's the real answer right now for us. That's the lesson. That's the min ayatina, the signs from Allah. Death is one of the signs that Allah keeps on mentioning in the Quran, only for us to think, only for us to ponder. But a lot of us today, someone passes away, we go to the grave, we go to the cemetery, we hear about that, but we don't pay no heed, and we don't reflect in our own hearts and our own life. How must we use that to better our life? And that's what we need to do, inshallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us.